I have something to tell you.
Sola, I can't continue with this relationship. I have met someone else.
What do you mean you've met someone else?
I didn't plan for this to happen.
He left her for a richer woman. She was pregnant when he did it. He didn't know. She didn't tell him. Then she just got up on her feet and built a company worth 2 billion naira. This is what happened when he finally found out. Now, before I tell you what happens next, click on that subscribe button if you love stories where the humble rise and the proud fall, and comment where you're watching from in the comments. She didn't fall. She didn't scream. She stood completely still, and that stillness was the most terrifying thing she had ever felt. Like her body understood the news before her brain did, and it was shutting down her systems one by one.
What do you mean you've met
"You've
someone else?
met someone?"
I didn't plan
she
for this to
repeated.
Who is she?
"Yes,"
It doesn't
he
matter.
replied confidently, like she's doing her a favor. "Her name is Vanessa. We've been seeing each other for 4 months." 4 months? She calculated backwards. 4 months ago, she had
Happy
thrown him
birthday,
a
I hope you
surprise
like it.
birthday
Thank you
dinner.
so much. This is
She had
wonderful.
saved 3 months of her salary to buy him a Rolex he had been pointing at every time they passed the shop on Broad Street. She had cooked his mother's recipe, the one his mother had whispered to her the Christmas before she passed, because she wanted him to feel loved. 4 months ago, she had told him, "You are the best decision I ever made." "Why?" she asked. Her voice didn't crack. It was almost too steady. Daniel finally looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes that was worse than cruelty. It was justification. He had already built the case. He had already decided she was the problem, and now he just had to explain the verdict. Vanessa comes from a different world, Sola. Her family is connected. Her father owns 3 hotels. She has resources, networks, a lifestyle that He paused, chose his next words. "I have ambitions. I need a partner who matches where I'm going, not where I've been." Silence. She heard what he didn't say. "You are where I've been. You are the past. You are not enough." "You need a richer woman," she said softly. He didn't deny it. He looked at the floor briefly. "I didn't plan for it to happen. You've been lying to me for 4 months. Sola, 4 months, Daniel." He opened his mouth, closed it. Then he said, "I'm sorry. I truly am. But staying would be worse. You deserve to know the truth." She almost laughed. "You deserve to know the truth," said by a man who just told his girlfriend of 3 years while she was secretly holding proof of his child that he was leaving her for a hotel heiress. She still didn't show him the test. She didn't know why. Maybe pride, maybe shock, maybe something deeper. A quiet voice inside her that whispered, "He doesn't deserve to know yet. Not like this. Not from a man who is already halfway out the door." "Get out," she said. Softly, not dramatically, just get out. Daniel blinked. He had expected tears, maybe, shouting. He probably had prepared for all of it, but not this. Not her voice, calm and cool, like the surface of still water, unreadable, unbreakable. "I'll come back for my stuffs later," he said. "Send someone. Don't come back yourself." She turned away from him and walked to the kitchen. She heard the door open. She heard it close. She stood at the kitchen sink and gripped the edge until her knuckles went white. She was 28 years old. She was 3 weeks pregnant, and she was alone. Her name was Soladoyin Adeyinka, and if you saw her on the street 2 years before this moment, you would not have thought she was someone life would hit this hard. She grew up in Surulere, Lagos, middle child of 5. Father was a civil servant who retired early and never fully recovered from the pay cuts. Mother sold fabric by the roadside. fabric she laid out every morning before 6 a.m. regardless of weather. Sola grew up watching her mother's hands, always busy, always building, never still. She wasn't the most brilliant in her class, but she was consistent. She studied accounting at Yabetek, passed her professional exams on the second attempt, and by the time she was 25, she had a small but solid job at an auditing firm in Lagos Island. She was serious, measured. She didn't trust easily, but when she did, she gave everything. She met Daniel Okoro at a mutual friend's wedding in Ikeja. He was charming in a way that felt genuine, the kind of man who made you feel like the most interesting person in the room without trying too hard. He worked in telecom sales. He wasn't rich, but he was working. He had plans. He spoke about the future with such confidence it was contagious. Within 6 months, they were living together in a one-bedroom in Bagada. Within a year, she believed she was building a life. She cooked. She planned. She paid bills some months when his commissions were slow. She never mentioned it, never kept score. When his mother was sick, Sola sat in that hospital corridor for 2 nights straight. When he lost a major sales deal and went quiet for a week, she gave him space and then showed up with food and sat with him without demanding explanation. She loved him fully. And he had been sleeping with Vanessa Balogun for 4 months. The night he left, Sola sat on the bathroom floor for a very long time. She held the pregnancy test between her palms and she tried to feel something: anger, grief, panic. But what came instead was a strange, aching clarity. He's gone. There is a child coming. These are the only 2 facts that matter right now. She didn't call her mother that night. She didn't call her friends. She sat with it alone, on that cold tile floor, and somewhere in that silence, she made a decision. She would not beg. She would not chase. She would not announce her pregnancy to the world to make him feel guilty. She would not post anything online. She would not cry to mutual friends who would inevitably tell him, and then he would come back out of obligation and not love. And she had too much dignity for that.
She would handle this alone, and she would make something out of it. She just didn't know yet what that something would be. The weeks that followed were not easy to describe. She told her mother 2 weeks later. Her mother, Mama Sola, didn't cry. She sat across from her daughter at the small dining table in the Suru Lere house, hands folded, and she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Did he know before he left?" "No." Her mother nodded slowly. "Good. Then you owe him nothing." That was all she said about Daniel. What came next was practical. Where would Sola live? How would she manage the pregnancy while working? What would she do after the baby came? She had some savings, not much, about $3,000, enough for maybe 4 months of rent and feeding if she was disciplined. She left the Bagada apartment. She couldn't afford it alone, and she couldn't afford the ghost of him in every corner. She moved in with her mother temporarily, took the small room at the back where she used to do homework as a child. She stared at the ceiling that first night in that small room and felt the strange full circle of it. She had worked so hard to leave this room, and here she was. But she didn't wallow. Wallowing was a luxury she couldn't afford. She went back to work on Monday morning. The first person who guessed was her colleague, Mary. Mary caught her in the bathroom during a wave of nausea, held her hair back without asking any questions, and when it was over, she just handed her a bottle of water and said, "How far along?" 7 weeks, Sola said. Mary nodded. The father? Not in the picture. Another nod. No dramatic reaction, no flood of questions. Just, "Okay, what do you need?" That was the first time Sola actually cried. Not with her mother, not alone on the bathroom floor, but in the office bathroom at Bridges & Co. auditing firm, standing under the humming fluorescent light, because one person had looked at her and simply asked what she needed. She pulled herself together in 3 minutes, washed her face, went back to her desk. She didn't fall apart again after that. Daniel, meanwhile, had wasted no time. Within 6 weeks of walking out of that apartment, he had moved into Vanessa Balagun's world like he was born to it. Vanessa lived in a serviced apartment in Lekki Phase 1. Her father's name opened doors in rooms Daniel had only ever pressed his face against the glass to look into. She drove a Prado. She had a stylist. Her Instagram was the kind that made grown men rearrange their ambitions. And Daniel was now part of it. He posted their first photo together 11 days after leaving Sola. They were at a rooftop bar, ocean behind them, drinks in hand. He was wearing a shirt Sola had never seen before. Probably Vanessa bought it. He was smiling the way he used to smile at Sola. And she recognized that smile. She recognized the angle of his head, the way he leaned in. She didn't comment. She blocked him. Not out of heartbreak, out of self-preservation. She had a child growing inside her, and she couldn't afford to feed herself the poison of watching his new life every morning before breakfast. She blocked him, and she kept moving. At 12 weeks, she told her boss, Mr. Fashola. He was a short, serious man who ran the auditing firm with quiet precision. He listened without interrupting, then asked, "Will this affect your work?" "No," she said. "Then we have nothing to discuss until you need to discuss it." She went back to her desk and worked harder than she ever had. She started arriving earlier, staying later. She took on an extra client file that no one else wanted, a messy small business with 3 years of unreconciled books. She worked through it methodically, found irregularities no one had caught, saved the client close to ₦1 million and penalties. Mr. Fashola gave her a small raise. She put every extra coin aside. But at night, when the house was quiet and her mother was asleep, Sola sat at the small table in the back room with her laptop open, and she was doing something else entirely. She had been thinking for years about a problem she saw in small Nigerian businesses, particularly traders, artisans, market women, fabric sellers like her mother. These were people who handled real money every day, but had no structured way to track it, no simple tools, no affordable accountant. They kept mental notes or wrote figures in the margins of children's exercise books or trusted memory that sometimes failed. And every year, hundreds of small businesses died, not because the idea was bad, but because the owner couldn't see where the money was going. Sola had been turning this over in her mind for 2 years. Now, alone, pregnant, with nowhere to funnel her energy except forward, she started building a solution. It began as a simple spreadsheet template, customized for traders. She tested it on her mother's fabric business first, sitting with Mama Sola on Saturday mornings to enter the week's records. Her mother stared at the screen like it was performing magic. "I didn't know I was making this much profit," her mother said one afternoon, pointing at a number. "You were also losing it here," Sola said, pointing at another. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then she laughed. Not from embarrassment, from the quiet power of suddenly being able to see clearly. That laugh stayed with Sola for a long time. She kept building.
It was a simple financial tracking tool designed specifically for informal businesses. Mobile-friendly, offline capable, no accounting degree required. Instructions in English, Yoruba, and Pidgin. It could be used on a basic Android phone. She named the app The Breakthrough. She spent the last months of her pregnancy building it every night. When her back ached and her feet swelled and sleep came in broken pieces, she opened the laptop. When she was 7 months pregnant, she reached out to a developer she had met at a fintech meetup 2 years before, a young man named Clinton who worked cheap in exchange for equity. She told him what she needed. He looked at her wireframe and said, "This is actually smart." They struck a deal. Her daughter was born on a Tuesday morning in October. She came fast, loudly, furiously into the world, and when the nurse placed her in Sola's arms, she was so small and so real and so completely here that Sola forgot, for the first time in months, to be afraid. She named her Ruth. Daniel did not know the child existed. His name was not on any paperwork. He was not in the hospital. He was not in the room. He had been absent before Ruth arrived, and Sola saw no reason to change that. She took 6 weeks of leave, breastfed and healed and slept in fragments and stared at her daughter's face in the dark and thought about everything she wanted to build for this child. At week 7, she was back at her desk. At week 8, Clinton sent her the first working version of the Breakthrough app. She tested it obsessively, fixed errors, simplified the language further. She drove to Balogun Market on a Saturday and stood at 3 different stalls asking traders if they would try something for her, just for free, just for a week. Come back and tell her what confused them, what helped, what was missing. 7 of the 8 traders came back. 6 of them wanted to keep using it. One of them, a young woman who sold provisions, held up her phone and said, with real feeling, "I could see everything. I've never been able to see everything before." Sola launched the Breakthrough app publicly in March. No big press, no tech influencers. She put it in 2 WhatsApp trader groups, posted 3 short videos explaining it in Yoruba and English, and shared it to a women's business network she had quietly been building for years. In the first week, 200 downloads. By the end of the month, 2,000. By the 3rd month, she got an email from an fintech accelerator in Lagos inviting her to apply for their next cohort. She almost didn't apply. Ruth was 4 months old. She was working full-time. She was sleeping 5 hours a night on a good day. She was in her mother's back room. Then, she finally applied. She got in. And this is where this story shifts. This is where Sola's quiet building stopped being quiet. Because the app she built connected her to investors, real ones, not social media investors who promised things and disappeared. Actual institutional money, patient capital, people who had built fintech infrastructure across West Africa and were looking for the next product that could touch the informal economy. They saw the Breakthrough app, and they saw something Sola had understood from the beginning, but hadn't had the language to explain to others, that the informal economy in the country was worth trillions of dollars, and it was almost entirely invisible to any financial system because nobody had given its workers the tools to make themselves visible. Her app was that tool. The first investment round closed at $50 million. Sola sat in the lawyer's office and stared at the document for a long time before she signed it. Then she called her mother. "Mama, what happened?" Her mother heard it in her voice immediately. "I think something is starting," Sola said. She didn't celebrate, not publicly, not yet. She moved out of her mother's back room, found a small but decent flat in Yaba, set up a proper corner for Ruth, put a second-hand desk near the window, and walked from it every morning from 5 to 7 before her daughter woke up, and every night from 9 to midnight after she was asleep. She hired Clinton full-time, then a customer support person, then 2 more developers. The Breakthrough app grew bigger. And in a different part of Lagos, Daniel Owo's life was beginning to show its first cracks. He had spent nearly a year inside the Balogun family world, and he had learned slowly that wealth with conditions attached is not wealth at all. It is a lease, and leases have terms. Vanessa's father, Chief Balogun, was a man who had built his empire the old way, through relationships, favors, and a very precise understanding of what people owed him. He had allowed Daniel into his family's orbit not out of fondness, but because Vanessa wanted him there. And Chief Balogun had a policy. Anyone close to his daughter was useful or they were gone. Daniel was expected to be useful. He was given a position in one of Chief Balogun's smaller hotel properties, an operations coordinator role that sounded important and paid well, but which Daniel slowly realized was essentially a watchman position with a better title. The real decisions were made by men who had been in the family's employ for 15 years. Daniel was decorative, a son-in-law audition. He smiled through it. He wore the shirts. He attended the dinners. But at night in the Lakey apartment, he was beginning to feel something he hadn't expected. Small. The first time he heard about the Breakthrough app was from a colleague's wife at one of Chief Balogun's dinner parties. "Have you seen this app that a very young and intelligent woman built? Ruth's mother. What's her name?" He asked subconsciously. "Sola doing something. They're saying the accelerator gave her 50 million.
He didn't hear the rest. His chest contracted, a slow, strange tightening. Soladoyin. He hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in over a year. He had quietly unblocked her on Instagram 3 months after the breakup, told himself it was just curiosity. Her profile was private now. He saw nothing. He had let it go, or thought he had. "What did you say her name was?" he asked, keeping his voice even. "Soladoyin. Adeyinka, I think? The fintech woman. She's all over the business news this week." Daniel excused himself from the table. He sat in the bathroom for 4 minutes staring at his phone. He searched her name, and there she was, a profile photo, professional, composed, beautiful in a way that surprised him, not because she had changed, but because he had somehow forgotten. She was holding a child. A child. His blood went cold. A little girl, maybe 1 year old in the photo, round-cheeked, bright-eyed, wearing a white dress. Who was the father, was his first thought. Then, slower, darker, when was she born? He did the math. He sat in that bathroom for a very long time. He told himself the girl wasn't his. That was the first thing he did, the thing men do when they suspect the truth and cannot afford to face it. He built a small, convenient wall of doubt and stood behind it. It must be someone else's child. She moved on fast. The timing isn't necessarily, he told himself quietly. But the math kept coming back. He had left her in early October the year before. The child in the photo looked to be around 12 to 14 months. He had seen the post dated 3 weeks ago, which meant Sola had been pregnant when he walked out of that apartment. When he walked out with his jacket still on, like he wasn't planning to stay. He sat on the edge of the bathtub and rubbed his face with both hands. There was a small, cowardly part of him that wanted to close the app, go back to the dinner table, eat his fish and drink his wine, and pretend he had seen nothing. It had been over a year. He had made choices. He was building a life. He was about to be proposed to Vanessa formally. Chief Balagun had already hinted at it in that stiff, performative way powerful fathers hint at things they have already decided. He had a path. He just needed to stay on it. He went back to the table. He smiled at Vanessa when she looked up at him. She touched his hand briefly, a gesture of ownership more than affection, and went back to her conversation. He ate his food, but the child's face sat behind his eyes all evening like something burning quietly in another room. He did not contact Sola that night, or the next. He gave himself 3 days to settle, told himself he was being rational, not cowardly. He needed to think before he acted. He needed to be sure. On the 4th day, he searched her name again. There were 2 new results. One was a short feature in a Lagos fintech publication, Meet the Mother and Founder Behind the Breakthrough, the app changing how market women manage money. The other was a brief mention in a broader article about women in Nigerian tech. He read the article slowly. It was not a long article, but it was the kind of article that made a person real. They had asked her about her background, about the product, about what inspired it. She had talked about watching her mother lay out fabric before sunrise every morning and never being able to fully account for what she made. She talked about the informal economy being full of intelligent, hard-working people who were invisible to every financial system because no one had given them a mirror. She did not mention him. She did not mention the pregnancy. She did not mention being abandoned. She had taken the most painful chapter of her life and simply refused to make it the story. He didn't know why that made him feel worse. The article ended with a quote from her. "I didn't build this to prove anything to anyone. I built it because I could see a need and I had the skill to answer it.
The rest just followed. He closed his phone. He stared at the ceiling of the Lecky apartment, the expensive ceiling, the apartment that was technically Vanessa's name on the lease, in the building that technically belonged to her father's property portfolio. He thought about Sola in her mother's back room. He thought about the child. He thought about the 50 million naira. He sent a message on a Thursday evening. He had written it and deleted it 4 times. The 5th version was the most stripped down, the least dramatic he could manage. Sola, I came across your work recently. You've done something incredible. I also saw the photo of your daughter. I don't know how to ask this. Is she mine? I just need to know. He stared at it for a long time, then sent it. She saw it on Friday morning before she left for office. She was standing in the kitchen making Ruth's first small meal of the day, mashed crayfish and yam, and her phone lit up with a message notification, an old contact. She had unblocked him 3 months ago without thinking too hard about why. Closure, maybe, or just the administrative act of removing something that was taking up space. She read the message. She put the phone face down on the counter in annoyance. She fed her daughter. She bathed her, dressed her in the small green outfit with the white collar. She dropped her with her mother for the day. She drove to work. She sat at her desk and opened 3 client files.
At noon, she picked up her phone and read the message again. Then she typed, "Her name is Ruth. She is 14 months old. She is mine. I am not asking you for anything." She pressed send. She went back to work. His response came 6 hours later. "Can I see her?" She didn't respond that day, or the next. On the 3rd day, she replied, "I'll think about it." She never said yes. She never said no. She simply returned to building her life and left him in the waiting room of his own choices. Meanwhile, the breakthrough app was accelerating in ways Sola had not fully prepared for. The accelerator cohort ended in June with a demo day, a room full of investors, journalists, and fintech stakeholders in a hotel conference room in Victoria Island. Sola had practiced her pitch 31 times. She had delivered it in front of her mirror, in front of Clinton, in front of her mother, who understood nothing about fintech and therefore served as a perfect test audience for clarity. She walked to the podium that afternoon in a simple navy suit she had bought on her own terms, not expensive, but fitted, pressed, intentional. She said, "There are 42 million informal businesses operating in this country right now. They generate an estimated 65% of the country's GDP. And they are almost entirely invisible to every bank, every investor, every financial product that exists, because no one has helped them make themselves visible. The Breakthrough app is not only an accounting app, it is a clarity tool. We give traders, artisans, and market women the ability to see their own money for the first time. In 4 months, we have 200,000 users. 68% of them have never used a financial app before, and 73% report making better decisions within 30 days of starting." The room was quiet. Not uncomfortable quiet, the listening kind. She continued for 3 more minutes. Clean, clear, no filler. When she finished, the applause was real. 2 investors approached her directly after the presentation. One was Taiwo Sani, a fintech veteran who had co-founded 2 successful platforms and sat on the boards of 3 more. She was in her late 40s, wore no jewelry except small gold studs, and had a way of looking at people like she was calculating not their net worth, but their character. She shook Sola's hand and said simply, "You built this while raising a child alone?" "Yes," Sola said. Taiwo nodded once. "Then you already know something about doing hard things under pressure. That matters more than the pitch." The second investor was a man named Chidio Kafo from a Pan-African growth fund. He was warmer, more effusive. He talked about market size and expansion potential and regional licensing. He gave her his card with both hands and said, "We want to be involved in the Series A conversation." Sola took the card, thanked him calmly. Inside, she was running. She called her mother from the car park. "Mama, 2 investors want to talk about the next round." Silence on the line. Then her mother's voice, steady and warm. "Did you eat today?" Sola laughed. The real kind, the kind that comes from the belly. "Mama, you're always forgetting to eat. Ruth is fine, she's sleeping. Now tell me everything." The Series A closed 4 months later. $800 million. Sola sat in the lawyer's office again, the same uncomfortable chair, the same fluorescent light, different documents, a different number. She read every page before she signed, asked questions that surprised the lawyers, pushed back on one clause until they rewrote it. She signed it at 11:47 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. She drove home, picked up Ruth from her mother, sat on the floor of their flat, the Yaba flat, still modest, but clean and hers, and watched the afternoon light move across the wall. "We are okay," she told Ruth. The child grabbed her finger and tried to eat it. Sola laughed until her eyes were wet. Daniel found out about the Series A the same way he found out about the 50 million, through other people's conversations. This time, it was Vanessa herself who brought it up, which was its own particular cruelty. They were at breakfast in the Lekki apartment. Vanessa was scrolling her phone with the practiced half-attention of someone who consumed information the way some people eat, constantly, quickly, without full absorption. "This Iwoye app is everywhere this week. The founder raised almost $1 billion, some single mother from Surulere." She scrolled. "Wow, she's actually..." She looked up at Daniel. "Wait, Adeyinkan, isn't that the surname of the woman you used to?" "Yes," Daniel said. Vanessa looked at him, then back at her phone, then back at him again. "That's your ex?" "Yes." Vanessa put her phone down. Something shifted in her expression. Not jealousy exactly, more like recalibration, like she was adjusting the assessment of something she thought she had already categorized. "You left her. We broke up. You left her again." Not a question this time. He didn't answer. Vanessa picked her phone back up and returned to scrolling. She didn't say anything else. But for the rest of breakfast, she was very quiet, and the silence felt different from the comfortable kind. The thing about Daniel's life with the Balogons was that it had been built on a particular story, that he was an ambitious man who had made a smart choice. He had chosen up. He had recognized an opportunity, a better life, better connections, a woman whose world could elevate his. That was the version he told at dinner parties. It had the ring of boldness, of strategy. But now, every time someone mentioned the breakthrough app, and people were mentioning it constantly, the story shifted shape. Because the smarter choice, it turned out, was Sola.
He had left a woman who was sitting on something enormous, and he hadn't known it because he hadn't looked. He had looked at the small room in Surulere, and the modest salary, and the careful savings and seen ceiling. He had not looked at the mind behind it all. He had not seen what she was capable of when she had nothing else to do but build. That was the thing that kept coming back to him. She hadn't built the greatest app of all time despite him leaving. She had built it in the wreckage of him leaving. It was constructed out of the rubble he had left behind, and it had grown into something that now made his entire current life look small by comparison. He was a hotel operations coordinator. She was the founder of a company valued at over $2 billion. She's 1,000 miles ahead of him now. He requested to see Ruth in November. Sola read the message, showed it to no one, thought about it for 4 days. Then she agreed to a 30-minute meeting in a public place, a children's soft play area in Surulere, bright and loud and neutral. She arrived early. She had Ruth on her hip,
the child wearing her yellow dress with the small flowers. Daniel arrived 3 minutes late. He looked different, thinner, better dressed, Vanessa's influence clearly, but it sat on him like a costume. He stopped when he saw them, 10 feet away, and just stood there for a moment. Ruth looked at the stranger, blinked. Sola watched his face. She had braced herself for many things, for her to be emotional, for him to be dramatic, for him to say things that would require her to respond. She was prepared for all of it. What she was not prepared for was how ordinary he looked, how ordinary this whole moment felt. Not devastating, not triumphant, just real. Just a man who had made a terrible choice, standing in a soft play center, looking at the consequence of it. "She looks like you," he said. His voice was quieter than she remembered. "She looks like herself," Sola said. He nodded. He didn't reach for the child. He seemed to understand that some permissions hadn't been granted yet and might not be. "How are you?" he asked. "Fine. The company, that's not what we're here to discuss," she replied. He closed his mouth, nodded again. There was a long, strange silence. Around them, children climbed and jumped and screamed with the unbothered joy of people who had no idea what adult life cost. "I'm sorry, Sola," he said. Not loudly, not performatively. It came out like something that had been pressing against the back of his teeth for a long time and had finally found a crack. She looked at him. She thought about the night on the bathroom floor, the 12 weeks alone, the back room in Surulere, the mornings with her laptop open at 5 a.m. while her daughter slept, the 50 million, the 800 million, the little girl on her hip who did not know this man and did not need him to be whole. She thought about all of it, and she said, "I know." Not, "It's okay," not, "I forgive you," just, "I know." She picked up her bag, settled Ruth more firmly on her hip, and said, "I'll be in touch about access arrangements. You'll need a lawyer. So will I." And she walked out. She sat in her car for a few minutes afterward, not crying, just breathing. She had imagined this moment, not obsessively, not daily, but occasionally, in the quiet moments between things. She had wondered what it would feel like to see him again. She had thought it might break something open in her. She had thought there might be a flood. But there was no flood. There was just the low, steady hum of her own life, the weight of her daughter against her shoulder, the afternoon light coming through the windshield, the phone in her bag with 37 unread messages from her team and 2 from Taiwo Sani about a partnership meeting next week. Her life did not stop when she was in that room with him. It kept going. It didn't even pause. She started the car. What happened next came from a direction no one expected. Not from Sola, not from Daniel, from Chief Balogo. If you're still here, take a moment to subscribe for more gripping stories like this, and sit tight because you are not ready for the twist in this story. Vanessa's father had spent 40 years being the most powerful person in every room he entered, and he had developed a very precise instinct for when something in his world was shifting. It was not a dramatic instinct, not loud or reactive. It was quiet, like how animals sense weather before it arrives. He had sensed something shifting around Daniel for months. The Series A news about the breakthrough app circulated in the same business networks Chief Balogo moved through. People talked about it at events. People mentioned the founder's name. And very quickly, a pattern emerged in those conversations that Chief Balogo found troubling, not because of Sola's success, but because of what Daniel's connection to it implied. Here was the story people told. Imagine leaving a woman like that. It was never said to Daniel's face. It was said in the way things are always said among people who know each other well enough to be honest when the subject isn't present. Sola had become, quietly, a symbol. Not of bitterness or revenge, she was too composed for either, but of something that made men like Chief Balogun uneasy. A person who had been underestimated and converted that underestimation into fuel. And Daniel had done the underestimating. Chief Balogun called Daniel into his office on a Tuesday afternoon in December. It was a brief meeting.
He told Daniel that the operations coordinator position was being restructured. The new arrangement would involve Daniel relocating to manage a smaller property in Abuja. Temporary, he said. Strategic realignment. Daniel knew what it meant. He had been moved to the edge. He drove home that evening in a silence so complete it had texture. He thought about the last 14 months, everything he had acquired and everything it had cost. The apartment, the title, the dinners, the feeling of moving up, always up, and how long it had taken him to realize that the elevator he was riding belonged to someone else. He thought about Sola. He thought about the moment she walked out of that soft play center with their daughter on her hip and hadn't looked back. He thought about how she had said, "I know," when he apologized. Not with coldness, not with satisfaction, just with the exhausted simplicity of a woman who had processed everything already and had come out the other side. He pulled over on a quiet street in Lekki. He sat in the car for a long time. He opened his phone. He went to her contact. He typed, "I want to be there for Ruth, properly, not as a visitor. I know I have no right to ask for anything. I just want to be her father." He stared at it. He sent it. Then he put his phone in the glove compartment and drove home. 3 weeks later, Vanessa told him it wasn't working. She was calm about it, almost clinical. She said she had been thinking for a while. She said they wanted different things. She said she thought he needed to figure out what he actually wanted from life. She wasn't wrong. He didn't argue. He moved out on a Saturday. He fit everything he truly owned into 2 bags and a small box. He stood in the lobby of the building and realized that in 14 months of living in that apartment, he had accumulated almost nothing that was genuinely his. The furniture was hers, the art was hers, the kitchen equipment, the curtains, the good plates. 2 bags and a box. He drove to a hotel. Not one of the Balagon properties, a modest place in Yaba, the kind that charged per night. Continental breakfast included. He sat in that hotel room and opened his laptop for the first time in months to do something other than work tasks. He looked up the Breakthrough app. He spent an hour reading about it, not the business news version, the human version. He found a podcast interview Sola had done 2 months before. He put his earphones in and listened. The host asked her about her inspiration. She talked about her mother's hands. She talked about the market women. She talked about clarity, about how so many people were working hard and still falling behind, not because they were failing, but because they couldn't see. The host asked, "Was there a moment that made you decide to bet on yourself? A turning point?" There was a brief pause on the recording. "Yes," Sola said, "but it wasn't a happy moment. Someone made a decision that closed a door and I had to figure out what to do with a lot of empty space and a very small amount of time. I chose to fill it with something useful." The host laughed softly. "And it became this?" "Yes, it became this," Sola said, smiling. The host asked if she wanted to say more about that moment. "No," Sola said simply. And in her voice was no bitterness, no invitation, no wound dressed up as a story. Just the answer, no. Daniel took his earphones out in absolute disappointment in himself and laid flat on the bed. January arrived the way it always does in Lagos, loud, hot, and completely indifferent to whatever the previous year had done to you. Sola woke at 5 a.m. on the first working Monday of the new year. She made tea. She sat at the desk by the window. Ruth was still sleeping in the next room. She could hear the small, steady rhythm of her breathing through the baby monitor. Outside, the city was already moving.
generators humming, the particular ambient noise of a place that never fully sleeps. She opened her laptop. There was an email from Taiwo Sanyi, sent at 11:43 the previous night. Taiwo slept less than anyone Sola had ever met. The subject line read, "You need to see this." She clicked it. Inside was a forwarded invitation. A regional fintech summit, 3 days in Accra, Ghana. The kind of event where the real conversations happened, not in the conference rooms, but in the dinners afterwards, in the corridors, in the quiet moments when the cameras were off and the serious people said the serious things. The invitation was not for a panel seat. It was not for a keynote slot. It was for the summit's annual Builders Award, given each year to one founder across West Africa who had demonstrated what the organizers called extraordinary impact built from ordinary resources. They had selected the application she built from scratch. They had selected Sola. She read the email twice. Then she went and made more tea because she didn't trust herself to react properly until she was fully awake. She told Clinton first because he had been there from the beginning and he deserved to hear it before anyone else. He screamed, literally. Over the phone at 6:15 in the morning, he screamed so loudly she had to hold the phone away from her ear, and Ruth woke up in the next room. "Clinton," she said, trying not to laugh. "Clinton, Sola, the Builders Award? Do you understand what—" "I understand. Lower your voice." "I am lowering my voice. This is my low voice. Sola, Accra, the Builders Award? Do you know who has won that before? Do you know the names?" "I know."
Then why are you so calm? She looked at her daughter, now standing up in her cot in the next room, watching her through the doorway with wide morning eyes. "Because calm is how I got here," she said. She told her mother that evening. Mama Sola was sitting on the veranda of her Surulere house, shelling melon seeds into a bowl. She did this every evening, a rhythm so old it had become part of the house itself. Sola sat beside her and told her about the award and the trip to Accra. Her mother kept shelling for a moment after she finished. Then she put the bowl down. She looked at her daughter. And she said something she had never said before, not because she hadn't felt it, but because she was a woman who expressed love through presents and food and early mornings and fabric laid out before sunrise, not with words. She said, "I prayed for you every single night." Simple, exact. Sola took her mother's hand and held it. They sat on the veranda as the evening came in, and the street filled up with the noise of ordinary life, and neither of them said anything else for a long time. She flew to Accra on a Thursday. She had never been. She had only ever left Nigeria once before, a work trip to Abuja, which barely counted. She sat in the window seat of the plane and watched Lagos shrink below her and felt something she hadn't expected. Not pride, not triumph, just space. The sensation of having come far enough from the origin point that she could finally turn around and see the full distance. She thought about the bathroom floor. She thought about the back room in Surulere. She thought about the Saturday mornings with her mother's fabric records, and the moment Mama Sola said, "I didn't know I was making this much profit," and laughed. She thought about Ruth's face the first time she held her. She thought about 5 a.m. and open laptops and 31 practice pitches. She thought about how none of it had felt heroic while she was doing it. It had just felt like the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. One foot, then the other. One problem, then the next. A spreadsheet, then a tool, then a product, then a company. The plane leveled off above the clouds. She opened her laptop and reviewed her keynote one more time. The summit was held at a hotel in Labon, large, airy, the kind of space designed to make people feel like decisions made inside it would last. On the first day, she sat in the audience for 3 sessions and listened carefully. She took notes. She introduced herself to 4 people, not because the room demanded networking, but because she was genuinely curious about the work they were doing. That evening at dinner, she was seated next to a woman named Abena Mensah, a Ghanaian investor who had spent 20 years in development finance before moving to early-stage tech. Abena was 61, wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and had the particular quality of older, accomplished women who no longer needed to perform their intelligence, therefore simply expressed it. She talked for 2 hours about informal economies, about women and capital, about the difference between building a business and building an institution, about what it meant to design for people who had been invisible to every previous design. At the end of the dinner, Abena said, "You're going to be all right, you know." "I hope so," Sola said. "I don't say things I hope, I say things I've observed." She put her reading glasses down and looked at Sola over the rim. "You have the thing that's hardest to teach. You know who you're building for because you've lived close enough to them to feel the need. That's not common." The award was on the final evening. The room held 300 people, the kind of room where the air itself felt expensive, chandeliers, linen tablecloths, the soft hum of a string quartet that nobody was quite listening to. Sola wore a deep burgundy dress she had bought in Lagos, not designer, but beautiful. She had done her own hair the night before, sitting on the hotel floor with a YouTube tutorial and more patience than she had expected to need. She was seated at a table near the front with Taiwo Sani and 2 other members of the Breakthrough Board. Taiwo looked at her dress and said, "You look like money." Sola said, "I look like me." Taiwo smiled. "That's the same thing now." The awards ran in order of category. The Breakthrough was the final one, the signature award, the one that closed the night. The presenter was a Nigerian economist named Dr. Emeka Enyega, who had spent 30 years studying informal economies across the continent. He was a small man with a large voice and the kind of delivery that made you feel like what he was saying had been distilled from decades of precise thought. He spent 4 minutes describing the problem, the invisibility of informal workers, the capital they moved without access, the intelligence they carried without recognition, the systems that had been built around them rather than for them. Then he said, "One company this year answered this problem not with theory, but with a tool, not with a complicated platform, but a simple mirror. They gave millions of people the ability to see their own money for the first time. They did it affordably, accessibly, and with a depth of cultural understanding that no imported product has ever achieved in this market." He paused. "The 2024 West African FinTech Builders Award goes to The Breakthrough, founded by Soladoyin Adeyinka." The applause started immediately and built. She stood up. She walked to the podium the way she had walked into every room in the past 2 years, not rushing, not performing, just moving with the calm intention of someone who had learned that presence was not something you borrowed from the occasion, but something you brought with you. She shook Dr. Afolabi's hand. He held the award out, a heavy glass piece, engraved. She took it and felt its weight. She looked out at the room. 300 faces, most of them strangers, all of them watching. She had prepared a speech, 4 minutes, clean, clear, properly structured. She opened her mouth and said something slightly different. "I almost didn't apply for this award." A small ripple of surprise in the room, the kind that comes when someone says the actual thing instead of the expected thing. "Not because I didn't believe in the work, but because I was very busy. I have a 2-year-old daughter and a company and a team of 9 people, and most mornings I am awake before the city is," and the form was long. Quiet laughter. "I applied because my co-developer told me I was being ridiculous." "He was right." She paused. "He's usually right. I pay him well." More laughter. She let it settle. Then she continued. "I want to talk about who I built this for. Not the investor version of who, not the demographic, not the addressable market, the human version." She told them about her mother.
the fabric laid out before sunrise, the exercise book with numbers in the margins, the Saturday mornings with the spreadsheet, and her mother's face when she could finally see everything. She told them about the provisions seller in Balogun Market who said, "I could see everything. I've never been able to see everything before." She said, "We talk a lot in this industry about disruption, about changing systems, about scale, and those things matter. But I want to be careful that we never forget the face of the person the system was failing, because if we forget her face, we will eventually build the same thing she was already excluded from, just with a better interface." Silence. The real kind. This award belongs to every market woman who ever kept her accounts in her head because no one gave her a better option. This belongs to my mother, and it belongs to my daughter, who will grow up knowing that her mother looked at a hard year and decided to build something instead. She picked up the award. "Thank you." The applause was long. Taiwo was standing, Abenamensa was standing, Dr. Afolabi was nodding the way people nod when they recognize something true. Sola walked back to her table, sat down, put the award beside her plate. Taiwo leaned over and said, "Don't make me cry. I have a breakfast meeting tomorrow." Taiwo laughed, surprised. She called her mother from the hotel room at midnight. She picked up immediately, which meant she had been awake waiting. "How did it go?" "I won." Silence. Then, "Did you eat?" "Mama, I'm asking. These things, they put food out and people get excited and forget to eat." "I ate, Mama, I ate." Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then, "Your father would have been proud." Sola sat on the edge of the hotel bed. "I know," she said quietly. "He always said you saw things other people missed, even as a small girl. He said, 'That one she looks and she actually sees.'" She pressed her mouth to her hand briefly, breathed. "How is Ruth?" "Sleeping. She said, 'Mama,' today." She said, "What?" "She was pointing at the photo I have of you on the fridge. She said, 'Mama, I think she's invented her own name for you.'" Sola laughed, and this time it came with tears, and she didn't fight them. She sat in the hotel room in Accra, a ward on the bedside table, and cried the good kind, the kind that comes not from breaking, but from being so full there is simply nowhere else for it to go. She flew home on Saturday morning. Her mother was at the flat with Ruth when she arrived. The child screamed when she saw her, the pure, uncomplicated joy of a 2-year-old who has decided that her mother's arrival is the most important thing that has ever happened, and ran across the floor with the slightly unsteady charge of someone still negotiating the physics of legs. She dropped her bag and caught her. She held her daughter and smelled her hair and closed her eyes. This was the thing. Not the award, not the 800 million, not the applause in a room in Accra. This, the small, warm, entirely unremarkable weight of a child who loved her without condition. Daniel read about the award on a Sunday. He was in Abuja by then, managing the smaller Balogun property as instructed, a 52-room business hotel near the Central District that was clean but unremarkable in the way that business hotels in mid-tier cities always are. He had his own apartment now, small, his. 2 bags and a box had expanded slowly into something that resembled a life, though a quieter one than he had built stories about. He saw the headline on a tech news aggregator he had started following in the months since he found Sola's app. Nigerian founder Soladoyin Adeyinka wins West Africa FinTech Builders Award in Accra. He read the article. He read the excerpt of her speech, the part about her mother's fabric, the part about the market woman who could finally see everything, the part about her daughter growing up knowing her mother looked at a hard year and built something instead. He sat with it for a long time. He thought about a hard year. He thought about what he had done with his hard year. He thought about the hotel around him. 52 rooms, clean, unremarkable. Someone else's property, someone else's name above the door.
She didn't win because he left. She won because she decided on that bathroom floor, in the dark, completely alone, that his leaving was not the end of her story. That decision, made quietly, with no audience, no applause, no guarantee of outcome, that was the real moment. Everything else, the company, the award, the 800 million, that was just what happened when she refused to stop. I want to leave you with one question. If you were Sula, if someone you loved walked out and left you with nothing but pain and a choice, what would you have built? Think about that seriously, because most of us are sitting on something. Most of us have more capacity than the people who underestimated us ever knew. The question is never whether the ability is there. The question is whether you open the laptop at 5 a.m. If this story meant something to you, like, share, and subscribe. Leave your answer in the comments and come back next week. We have another story waiting for you.